will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I will do the invocation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our dearest Heavenly Father, thank you for the many blessings that we enjoy to be able to live here in this beautiful city of Riverton and the state of Wyoming. Please bless all that we do tonight as we go through the budget for the city of Riverton. Let us make good decisions that help with the welfare for all of the citizens of the city of Riverton. Please bless that we will all be safe as we travel home tonight. Please keep all of our emergency responders, police, and all those who protect us safe as they go about doing their job, keeping us safe. We ask all these things in the name of your beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay,
I thought I turned that off.
right on cue.
You're not.
Could I get the roll call?
Yes, Your Honor. Councilwoman Carla Borders.
Here.
Councilman Lindsay Cox.
Here.
Councilman Mike Bailey.
Here.
Councilman Dean Pronto.
Here.
Councilman Kyle Larson.
Here.
Councilwoman Christy Salisbury.
Here.
Mayor Tim Hancock.
I'm here.
Okay, so we are all present, so I declare that we have a quorum. I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Okay,
Second.
okay, motion by Councilman Pronto, seconded by Councilman Cox. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right. The first and last item on our agenda is the fiscal year 2024 budget presentation and discussion. City Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I appreciate it. And those watching at home and in the audience, I appreciate this opportunity to present to you our fiscal year 24 budget. Before I get started, I think it's appropriate for me to say thank you for the direction and leadership you've provided through this process, and also to say thank you to our city staff members. This ranges from our line employees to our managers to our department heads. Everyone participated in the creation of this budget, and I think it's appropriate for me to start by saying thank you. Mayor and council, you have a very good city staff, talented and dedicated, and a lot of hours went into preparing this. And shoot, I had a baby in the middle of it, so I appreciate my team helping me get through this budget and getting it to the point that we are today. As we look to this budget, I don't know, every budget presentation I've ever been in has to have some quote that starts, so I suppose I'll continue the tradition. A budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. Great principles. I didn't include the lame comic strips this year, so I thought I'd just leave it with the quotes. The next is, don't tell me where your priorities are, show me where you spend your money, and I'll tell you where your priorities are. I think we've tried to do that with this budget. As an agenda, I plan to give you an overview of what's before you as we look to the next fiscal year, and then we'll go through each of the funds. We'll address the capital, and then we'll close. There's no way for me to adequately address everything that's in this budget. However, I will hit the high notes, and I believe this should be an interactive process. You as the elected body have authority and stewardship over this budget. So please feel free to ask questions as we progress through. Again, I will stay at a relatively high level. All the detailed information is in the workbook that's already been presented to you. So please feel free to engage and ask questions as we go throughout. As an overview, what's being proposed at this time is a $38 million budget. This represents a 26% increase over the fiscal year 23 budget, which was $30.4 million. And that is an increase over what was in fiscal year 22 at 22.6. The significant increase in this budget relates to improvements that we hope to make in our community through capital investments. We show a capital expenditure budget of $21 million and change. That's a 57% increase over the current fiscal year. What's making that possible are increased revenue sources and grants that your staff worked very hard to secure. And then honestly, the support that the governor and the legislature provided municipalities during the last legislative session. We'll get into it, but specifically the supplemental funding account was increased, and we're putting that to use, I think, in our community. So when you look at that $38.5 million budget, 21 point almost 4 are going to improvements that we hope our community appreciates to improve the infrastructure they use every single day. To kind of project it as a comparison, some people like seeing the numbers, some people like seeing the graphics. You'll see this throughout the presentation, but this shows a breakout of the overall budget, the operating budget, and then again, the capital budget. So as a comparison, you're seeing that significant investment in our community, those dollars directly impacting our citizens. As we started this budget process, it was important, I think, for city staff and you as a council to establish our priorities. And maybe to divert from the slide a little bit, we as staff started with this document right here. The council goal-setting session that you had in February was a true guiding document for us. And I'll bring up just a few. As we look to present to you an allocation of funds, your first goal is communication and transparency, specifically to engage in mediums to push information to the community and to allow residents to report items to city staff. Basically, you wanted to find a way to have better connectivity and more efficient communication with the citizens that you represent. This budget proposes that. Through the work of our IT staff and Ms. Watson, we were able to find a software called TextMyGov. That is a feature that's actually part of the iWork system that we already subscribe to. This service will allow people to text issues through their phone to city staff. There'll be a clearinghouse, and we'll be able to create work orders through that iWork system. We haven't procured it yet, but we went through the process of receiving quotes to ensure that it was in this budget so we can hit the ground running July 1 to accomplish your goal. By comparison, we solicited other companies to provide the same, and I think we're getting a great deal with the partnership we already have with iWork and TextMyGov. The other quote that I received was for $18,000 for initial startup and $5,000 for a subscription every year thereafter. So what we're proposing at roughly $3,500 is very economical, but also I think accomplishes your goal. That was further communicated in your goal number 4 of city operations. You want us to inform the community of city operations through appropriate mediums. That's in addition to our website, our social media, and then the other publications that we push out before every single meeting. We hope that this TextMyGov option accomplishes the goal that you've set. You have a budget-specific goal for fiscal year 24. Specifically, you'd like to protect the city from the impacts of economic hardship, inflation, and unknown financial climates. The way that we're doing that is by being very responsible and conservative with this budget. We are not touching the required 18.5% reserve account or reserve monies for the general fund, the water fund, the wastewater fund, sanitation fund. So we're protecting that investment as far as the rainy day fund. You also have a goal to engage with the city staff in budget meetings, and I want to say thank you for that. We appreciated your participation in person and virtually, and also through communication via email. I hope that those synopses that I sent after each of our budget meetings were helpful to you and kept you in the loop of how this budget developed from capital, personnel, operations, and then going back through it again until we could balance. So thank you so much for your involvement. Finally, your goal for budget is to support community improvements and events. Clearly, we're proposing support to community improvements. We're also proposing support to community events. And that goes to some of the other goals that you have. Goal number 3 says that you'd like to have community and economic development opportunities in this city fiscal year '24. You have a specific goal to support 2 major community events each year. We've put $5,000 into this budget so that you can choose how to support community events. I know that during our goal-setting session, there was an idea of having some type of winter activity that engaged all the community. We hope that that $5,000 will help you accomplish that goal. So that's specific in the financial component as we look to fiscal year '24 to accomplish your goals. Your other goals we'll manage just through our normal operations, and we'll be sure to report back to you as a city staff on how we're doing with your goals. As we get back to the slides, we want to take care of our employees. As our number one priority with this budget, we feel that we need to help our employees address the inflation and cost of living increases that they've been impacted over these last few years. This budget proposes a 4% cost of living adjustment, and it also allows for merit increases, which, depending on where an employee sits on the scale, and also depending on whether or not they're eligible for a merit increase, that could average to about 2.5% in a merit increase. To contrast that, right now the Wyoming Cost of Living Index shows a 7.4 increase. So that's what we're comparing it against. I also want to communicate that we're seeing increases in our health insurance to the tune of 11.5% rate increase, and also a 3% rate increase in dental insurance. We had to absorb that into the fiscal year '24 budget. Again, priority one, let's take care of our employees through cost of living impacts and also by taking care of benefits for them. And there's a little bit more detail I'll get to on the subsequent slide. The next is we have to be fiscally responsible. As a government entity, we have a trust over the public funds that are provided. So city policy requires 18.5% reserve. I've already addressed this, and this budget does not touch the 18.5% reserve. That said, we are proposing a transfer of unobligated cash to help with capital investment and operating investments. That's been outlined in your budget workbook. That transfer of cash, again, is unobligated and available for our use, and I think at this point we have a responsible proposal for you. But we will not touch that rainy day account. Getting back to personnel, I want to thank Ms. Watson for the work she's done in preparing the personnel budget and also in helping prepare this report to you. This is a historical perspective of the increases that the city has offered, whether step increases or cost of living adjustment, as it compares to the Wyoming cost of living. You'll notice that the bottom line in that row shows the cost of living adjustment each year, and then in the columns that coincide with that show what the city was able to do. In some years, we were able to provide a step increase. Some years we weren't. Some years we were able to provide a cost of living increase. Some years we weren't. And that's because, again, as a city staff and I think as elected officials, we always start from the standpoint of being fiscally responsible. And I want to attest to you that that's what you have with your city staff. As it shows in fiscal year 22-23, the current fiscal year that we're in, the cost of living adjustment was 9.3. The current fiscal year that we are in, we were not able to propose a COLA for our employees to offset that increase. We were able to propose, and you were able to approve, merit increases. This proposed budget, again, shows that we'd like to have a 4% COLA as at least a baseline and a starting point, and then the inclusion of step increases. If we look at the cumulative numbers across the years from fiscal year 16 until the upcoming fiscal year, I think the city of Riverton has tried to take care of its employees, and the numbers show that. When we see that there's been 27.9% of an inflation or an adjustment, and the city has kept up at least 26.5%, we're close. We're still lagging a little bit behind, but we are close. Now, it should be noted that not every employee receives those merit increases. If we have an employee that's well tenured and they're at the top of the scale, they're at the top of the scale. The only way for them to get an adjustment is through that COLA. Here's a brief overview of the benefits. I've already touched on our increase in health insurance, but we do try to offer a competitive insurance package to our employees. Right now, we have 3 different deductible plans, and there are varying percentages of participation from our employees and from the city of Riverton. And that's outlined here. I don't think I need to go through that. But if you have questions about the the benefit package that we offer, we'd be more than happy to answer those questions. Having covered our overview priorities, let's get into each of the funds. And again, I'm going to cover high levels. I'm not going to go cost center by cost center, but I would be happy to stand for any questions. And I also know that my peers are available to answer questions as well. I will admit that my working memory to recall every detail of this budget will need to be assisted by my peers tonight. So it's okay that you call on them, or maybe I'll have to as well. Right now, the general fund budget total is $10.5 million. That reflects an increase of $1.6 million, or 19%, over the current year's budget of $8.8 million. We're seeing a few increases in our revenues. Sales tax anticipates a 13% increase. As communicated in your budget book, we've been pretty conservative on sales tax, and appropriately so, and I still think that we are. But in looking at the historical actuals for sales tax, we felt comfortable in making that increase of about $250,000. That's based on our trends as we look backwards at least the last 4 years. Property tax shows a 14% increase. Severance tax shows a 17% increase. Other sources of revenue either stayed relatively flat, but I do want to point out that we are projecting some decreases in revenues. Use tax shows an 18% reduction, and that's based on information that we've received from the Wyoming Association of Municipalities, and then also as we've done some analysis on historical figures. We are projecting a 20% reduction in our building encroachment fees, and that's based on the hard work of Mr. Miller as he's looked at the building trends looking forward, how we've been doing this fiscal year and last fiscal year, and we just think that it's appropriate to be a little bit more conservative on those fees that are charged for encroachment and building permits. The biggest benefit that you have in this budget is supplemental funding. That's basically over the cap revenue that the legislature authorizes. It's above what is in the formula for mineral royalties. So above the cap of the formula, the governor proposes an allocation to municipalities, and thank goodness the legislature jumps on board. We're going to see $2.1 million in supplemental funding, a 53% increase over the 1.3 that we were able to use this current fiscal year. Most of that is going to go towards those capital improvements that we talked about earlier. Expenditure assumptions, as you're able to see, we're showing 4% over last year's budget in the general fund. That covers a handful of increases, but a lot of it is the personnel increases, and we'll go into the detail on the next slide for that. We do show a transfer of funds of $1.3 million from cash to support capital, to match grants, and to support what we're doing with the supplemental, and then also in operations. To break it down by each cost center, you'll notice that this table shows fiscal year 23 and 24, and all of the cost centers, at least in the general fund. We've combined a few: police, fire, and victim witness. As we look at the change, and before people in the audience or at home start raising their eyebrows, yes, that it does show a 127% increase, not percent, but $127,000 increase for the city council and the mayor. I'd like to start by saying that is not going to your salaries. You're not paying yourself more. But what you're doing is, I think, better allocating the funds that are available to you. First and foremost, that $5,000 that we feel meets the goal that you set to support community events. We also have $2,000 in there for IT improvements for this room. Instead of this awesome projector, which does work, there's newer technology, and our IT team is proposing some large screen TVs that will bring us a little bit closer to modern technology as you hopefully have more efficient meetings and can provide information to the viewing audience and those at home. So $2,000 for improvements to the chambers. there's $12,500 in community gas contributions. This isn't a change in our budget. We received this year over year, but what we're doing is, and this is at the recommendation of Ms. Harris, we're putting it into your budget. So we're tracking how those funds are being used better. It's a revenue in and expenditure out. Before those expenses, we'd have it go to our Parks Department to help with improvements there. But we feel, and we're proposing, that you have $12,500 within your own line item that you can discuss as a council for community improvements with those funds that are granted to us. We're seeing an increase of $22,000 in legal services. That covers the lawsuit with CenturyLink that we followed your direction to file. And then some other legal matters that we're working through this current fiscal year that you're aware of that will go into the next fiscal year. Finally, where the majority of this money and increase comes from is the opioid settlement that you participated in. $86,000 of the opioid settlement is put into your budget so that we can work with you on how to put those into the community to help curb that epidemic that's, I think, impacting so many individuals and families. You'll notice a few other increases as I took all the time to explain yours. But if you have questions in regard to the other cost centers, please don't hesitate to ask. Or you'll notice in your budget books that there's a brief synopsis of where those increases are accounted for. And again, here's kind of more visual representation of your general fund. A lot of it is operating, and then you'll see a significant jump in those capital improvements of how we want to make Riverton a better place to live and take care of the infrastructure that we have stewardships over. If there's no other comments or questions about the general fund, I'll jump into enterprise funds if that's okay. Enterprise funds, as you know, are a little bit different than the general fund. Even state statute explains the enterprise funds account for operations that are financed and operated in a manner similar to private businesses and enterprises, where the intent of the governing body is that the costs and expenses, including depreciation, of providing specific goods and services to the general public are financed primarily through charges. The easy way to say that is user fees. So for the water utility, the wastewater utility, sanitation, there are service fees charged, and we try and run those similar to a private sector operation. We have 4 enterprise funds: water, wastewater, sanitation, and we do count the airport as an enterprise fund. But as reported in your budget book, this is really, it mirrors more closely a merit fund where there are some exclusive services provided by the airport, similar to exclusivity that's in the water and the sewer, where if you're not consuming it, you're not receiving the benefit. But with the airport, even if you're not consuming the service up there, you're still receiving the benefit through the economic development component of the airport. But we do account for it separately as part of the enterprise fund general practice. Getting to the water fund, we're showing a budget of $4.8 million. Now, I want to stop here. This has changed from what's in your budget book. And the reason being is we have a large project to replace meters. You'll remember this in that we applied to the State Loan and Investment Board for a significant grant, and we received it. When we prepared the budget initially, we put all of the costs and the revenues for this meter replacement into the water fund. It's more appropriate that split between the water and the wastewater fund because the meters that will be installed are also critical to the wastewater fund. So a change from what's in your current book is a little bit of a decrease in the water fund, but we'll see an increase in the wastewater fund, and it's because we've split that project and the revenues associated therewith 50-50. At $4.8 million, you're seeing a 53% increase over last year's. We are showing a 4% increase in the water receipts, and that's reflective of the rates that you approved in March. And then we're showing that significant grant. It's an ARPA program approved by the State Loan and Investment Board. $2.9 million grant split 2 ways. It's just about 1.5 that's going into the water fund. So again, you're seeing a significant increase in that water fund, but mostly that's absorbed in capital, and also it's reflected in the revenues that we're receiving to make those improvements. Wastewater fund, I'll go a little bit quicker because you've heard a little bit of the story, but this one, rather than a decrease from what was proposed to you earlier, you're seeing an increase to $4.6 million, 40% over last year's budget, but that's because of this large meter grant. We're showing a 1% increase in receipts. That's, I think, pretty conservative with what the rates are. We try and be conservative in our revenue estimates because there's nothing worse than getting over your skis and having to pull back. It's always easier to overshoot than undershoot. As we look at the wastewater fund, again, you're seeing a pretty big increase over the last year's overall budget, but you're also seeing significant improvement into your assets that you manage. In the sanitation fund, this one is also different. The reason this one's different is we can't get a truck that we budgeted this fiscal year before this budget closes out. And that's a sanitation truck. So Mr. Eggleston has been tracking this. He's on top of it. And just yesterday, he was on the phone with our suppliers. They informed him that this sanitation truck, and actually also an ops truck in the water and wastewater fund, would not arrive before we could close out this budget. So we're going to bring those expenditures into next fiscal year budget, but we're going to also bring in the cash that you encumbered this fiscal year to cover those expenses. So even though those numbers are different than what you saw in your budget book, it's not an impact necessarily on the budget because we're just carrying things forward that we were hoping to take care of this fiscal year. That being said, $3.8 million in the sanitation fund, 26% increase, excuse me. And this also supports some improvements in capital, not just that garbage truck that we carried forward, but we're also working on that landfill remediation project. You received an update from Enberg Miller recently. We do plan, with your approval, to engage the DEQ, enter the landfill remediation program, and get started on that process, and that's reflected in your budget here. The last enterprise fund is the airport fund. You're seeing, again, as a broken record, a significant increase because of capital investment. $9.9 million overall budget. It's a 44% increase, but you'll see why when we get to the capital component. As far as revenues go, the airport anticipates generating about $277,000 in fees from tenants and also operations. That's short of what the operating cost is for the airport. And so what we're projecting is a transfer from our PFC account to reimburse us for investments we made in capital in previous fiscal years. That is to the tune of $368,000. And then we're also using some of that supplemental funding that I referenced earlier to help balance operations in the airport, and that's to the tune of $140,000. So the shortfall that is at the airport for operations is being covered by those two sources of transfers of cash. This one's funny to me. I mean, if you look at the operating budget, you cannot tell me that Paul doesn't live on a shoestring budget. We have a wonderful team up there, and then you can't tell me that Mia's not going to have, hopefully not some heart attacks, but she's going to have some anxiety managing all of these grants, and she's done such a wonderful job. But we have one major project that'll have, I believe, 4 federal grants attributed to it. If not 4, it's at least 3. Let's say 3 for right now. He's released the pressure a little bit, but doggone, you have great staff that keep the operations running. So that covers your airport fund. I'd like to address your other funds just briefly. We do account for the optional excise tax, the half-cent economic development tax. You're seeing where we're projecting the budget. Overall, $948,000, $805 to go to EDGE, $119 to go to FCAG for ground transportation. You're going to ask, well, where's the air service side of it? We've got that in a different fund. This also shows our annual payment to Idea Inc. of $24,000 for the Riverwalk property. And we pay down basically the note on that. Once the note's paid, then that property transfers to us, and I think you're up to speed on that. The 1% optional excise tax through the Fix Our Road Citizen Committee is projected at $2.7 million. The 911 fund is projected at $30,000. That's consistent with what we've done in previous years. The Air Service Fund shows $700,000 from the half-cent optional excise tax, $600,000 transfer from the cash account in Fund 45 to balance the minimum revenue guarantee associated with air service. We're also showing $70,000 in grants, 40 from the state of Wyoming, 30 from the Wind River Visitor Council. Senior Center Endowment projects a budget of, the endowment fund is $881,000. We're showing $3,000 of revenues from interest in that, and then we're showing a transfer of $80,000 for improvements with the senior center. The Riverton Rendezvous, which is coming up quite quickly. And, Kristen's put a lot of work into it, so I think she's looking forward to it coming. What a wonderful event every single year. But you'll notice what we're projecting as far as a budget to support our balloon rally in that community event. Again, accomplishing a goal that you have. This budget does have an administrative allocation similar to previous budget. We're projecting $1.6 million and change to go to offset the burden that the general fund has to support your enterprise funds. You do not have a finance director in your enterprise funds, nor do you have an attorney in your enterprise funds or an HR director. Consequently, we do have a formula that shows how much should go towards the support of these services. Our auditors check it every year, and we're seeing a bit of an increase in this, but that's because we're also showing an increase in personnel costs this year. So 17.4% increase of administrative allocation from your enterprise funds to support the general fund. We're also paying down our debts. This table shows you, and I'm not going to go through these individually, but you'll see in your budget book that we did take out loans over the last several years, and we have our annual payments. We pay our bills, and we pay them down in a responsible manner. So this budget does include your debt service and your obligation there. Contracts for services. Most of you are up to date on this, but based on your work session this month, the allocation is $275,000 and broken down to 13 of the applicants for those funds. I won't go through these individually, as the council is already aware of them and made at least a consensus direction on that. If you do have a direction to change this, please let us know so that we can finalize the budget and include them appropriately. But this reflects the direction that we've received to date. I'm going to be very quick with capital. All of these projects are outlined in your budget book, as well as the narratives. You also have a Dropbox file and folder where you can access each of the application sheets, the details, what these projects are for, if there's grant funds that offset it, and any other pieces of information that you may need for this. All that said, I do want to focus on one of your general fund proposed projects. As we went through our capital planning meetings, we had, as you can imagine, to make some cuts in order to balance our budget, even though we are making significant improvements this year. One that was discussed is this tree removal project for $30,000. And another one that was discussed that is not included in this budget is a 200-gallon tank that's truck mounted that has a boom sprayer on it. And that would be used for weed spraying and weed management. We pulled that out of the budget. However, one of the council members got in touch with me after the fact and said, I'd like to maybe reconsider this. So we'd like to receive your discussion tonight about whether or not the tree removal project should be included in this budget, whether this 200-gallon boom sprayer should be included in the budget. Another thing that Mr. Eggleston made me aware of is we're budgeting for a new mosquito fogger, and our crews is what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. They're smart. The ingenuity that they have are working on one of the down foggers that we have not been able to use. Now, we have one that's operating, but if we get into a season where West Nile hits in our community, we double spray, and we want to have 2 foggers functioning for that. That was the purpose of this proposal. We may be able to get the fogger that we have at the yard that's down running, so that could be another option for that proposal that was cut for the weed sprayer. To give you just a little bit more detail on the tree removal project, this $30,000 budget basically takes care of all of the trees, and takes care of sounds a little bit crass. It removes the trees on the east side of City Park. If you approach City Park from the east, you'll see beautiful honey locust trees that are elevated in planter boxes, basically, that are raised through railroad ties. Those railroad ties are rotting and they're failing and they're falling, and so staff has looked at options to improve that area. This budget simply proposes to remove the trees with $30,000, and then staff time would have to be used to take out the railroad ties, take out all that excess dirt, and there's not money proposed to do anything else. And so it gets us started on this project, but it does not get us finished. We would need to look at future budget allocation to improve the parking lot or to make something different in that area. It may be possible to do a bigger project and seek grant fundings to do a holistic approach, not just that incremental removal and then our own labor to at least raise the ground. But that's something for you to consider. That's what this budget proposes, is the tree removal, city operations, and then just to leave it as it is until we can receive an allocation of funds to either place asphalt, put in other planters, plant more trees. Sky's the limit, but we don't have the money in this budget to do it.
Are you gonna have that discussion later? Or, yeah,
Mr. Chairman, Councilwoman, maybe right now would be best. That will stop you from having to listen to me.
Okay. Does anybody have any comment on that?
Your Honor, I do.
Just-
I was the council member that suggested we relook at the weed sprayer truck because that's one of the biggest areas that I have people talking to me about. It's almost as much as snow removal, but not quite as bad. But I think we're setting up ourselves to have a lot of complaints by not just getting the truck and taking care of the weeds. And I think the other project could wait till we have better funding to do something real with it.
Kyle?
What weeds are we talking about, and where are they located? Are they in the alleys or
They're
along?
everywhere.
You can't
Ask
say, you
anybody.
cannot say that. You've got to be more specific.
Okay,
Are they, everywhere?
Everywhere
They're
I
not in my
walk.
yard. Where? I mean, what are we
Do
talking
you not
about?
remember last summer?
I remember last
Where
summer.
were they last summer?
Your Honor, and maybe to help Councilman Larson's question, what this would do is help us specifically along our trails. The River View area has a beautiful trail adjacent to it, and that requires quite a bit of man-hour if you're using a weed eater or a hand sprayer to take down those weeds. This boom and 200-gallon tank would allow us to be a little bit more efficient to put down chemical to take care of the weeds in those areas. Along other portions of our trails, I don't think we really thought about alleys, but basically this would allow us for more efficient operations to cover more ground.
Do we get any help from Weed and Pest?
We receive support financially from Weed and Pest.
Does that mean we buy weed killer at a discount? Or do they fund some of that process, or?
Basically, they help fund the process, and we can get chemicals from them, and we do. By statute, because we own our program or we opt into running our own program instead of letting the Weed and Pest District do it, we receive a percentage of their revenue to control the weeds in our area. The benefit to managing our program and our weeds in our system is we can pick and choose whether they're noxious or nuisance weeds to manage. If it was up to Fremont County Weed and Pest, they would only address noxious weeds, and that's Russian knapweed and I'm forgetting the other, leafy spurge. Thank you. Mike Miller, everybody. So we receive, and we have received funds from them to support our own program. That's basically the support that we receive from Weed and Pest.
Okay.
Councilman Bailey, I guess if I can chime in briefly.
Go ahead, Mayor.
In some of the discussion that I've had with Mr. Butterfield about this, I think an attitude that he has that I appreciate is if if we're going to be going to others and saying, hey, there's a problem, you need to address weeds on your property, it makes much more sense for us to do that from a position of, I think the expression that Kyle used was keeping our own house clean, so to speak. And I think that's a good attitude, and one that we need to make sure that if we're going to be going to others and saying, hey, there's a noxious weed issue, we need to do what we can to be, I think the alleys are definitely a thought, the trails, anything that the city is in charge of. So when I had spoken to Kyle a little bit about this discussion with Councilwoman Salisbury, I was very much in support of this swap, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. Kyle, how much was the weed sprayer? What was the cost on that?
Brian, you're going to have to step in.
12,500.
Thank you.
Okay. And then what about the mosquito fogger?
It's 17,000.
Miraculously comes up to about $30,000.
Your Honor, I had a question about the tree removal. So I understand that there are possibly some funds coming from ARPA. I think we've applied for some of that. Would that be something we could use for the tree removal as a beautification project?
Your Honor, Councilwoman, those funds haven't been released yet, so we haven't applied. We can look into it once the funding is released. As I've looked into the previous year's funding opportunity, and these are opera funds managed by outdoor recreation through the state, they really want to focus on campsite improvements, trail improvements. Ironically, they put in shooting ranges as well. And I think everybody's focused on getting a shooting range right now based on the legislature. But those were examples in the previous funding round. They were very hesitant to improve parks per se. They specifically said, we're not going to fund splash pads and we're not going to fund playgrounds. Whether they fund tree removal is yet to be seen. There are grant opportunities out there. One that comes to mind is Land Water Conservation Fund. It has, since the 60s, improved several of our recreation facilities around the city of Riverton. It paid for the pool that we had that we then took out, and it paid for the splash pad that we replaced it with. So as we look at City Park and maybe our needs for parking, for beautification, bathroom improvements, picnic boweries, we could seek an opportunity through the Land Water Conservation Fund. We need to find the matching funds to do it, but that's where maybe we broaden our horizon a little bit and seek for some larger improvements if that's your direction. Those are just options. I know I'm getting in the weeds. So the ARPA funds I'm not too sure of, but I do know that there's other funding opportunities.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I was just going to mention the playground equipment. Didn't we help fund playground equipment through the
Not at,
School District 25?
is it the same?
It's a different project, but I know that we have some other funding that we could pull from, that we might be able to help them with that, which would free up some of the city money.
Excuse me.
It's $21,000 for playground equipment for Aspen Park.
You guys gave us almost 13,000 to the rec board for matching it with this budget. Obviously, we have to pay for it up front and then get reimbursed. So that's why that budget number's where it's at.
Okay, cool.
But I think what you're saying, Dean, is that there's additional money available
I think there's
probably that we
additional money
could
available that can-
maybe look at doing some park improvements.
But the rec board can't pay for a fogger, but it could pay for
Right,
playground equipment.
yeah.
So we can trade.
And I guess, for a long time, I think we've had other discussions about, I think City Park does need some real improvements, and I think way more than just taking the trees out, but I think that's a good start. Whenever we have a major event there, the rendezvous in the park, or concerts, or, any of that kind of stuff, there's not enough parking.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a great idea to take, a portion of that east side of the park out and put in some good, solid parking areas so that when there is an event, there's enough room for people to park and not have to be blocking Main and the subsidiaries and parking in businesses, parking lots and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, I think that's something we should pursue. And like you said, I think getting some beautification funds to use in a park where you couldn't use that for some of the other purposes, I mean, I think it would be a good idea to reallocate that. So I don't, is that, we can't really move anything today, but we can give instruction. I mean, what's everybody's opinion on that?
Well,
We've got to reallocate the 30,000 to the sprayer and the mosquito fogger, and then pursue other ways to do city park improvements, maybe.
I agree.
Everybody good there? Okay.
So, Your Honor, if that's your consensus, what we'll do is we'll keep the mosquito fogger on there. We'll swap this tree removal project for that boom sprayer. And we'll then come back and work with our recreation board to see if there's something we can do, or look at other grabbing.
Could we just keep the tree removal project in there, but at a lower minus the 12,500? So that you keep about half of it in there?
Your Honor, I actually really like that idea, especially if there's a match requirement. I do know that Mr. Eggleston has mentioned that there are other trees just outside of those that are on the east side of City Park that need to be removed by a professional. So even if we go in that direction, leaving some funds there would be very helpful.
And I've had a lot of citizen comments about that east side of the park. It's sort of, you know, those planter boxes and trees and bushes that are in there, you know, they sort of create a visual barrier to where people can be doing things that maybe are less not appropriate. And I think by keeping the park cleaned out and open and visible, I think it's going to help the problems at City Park too. So, I mean,
So with that, we'll keep the budget amount the same, but we'll split that specific one, reduce the tree, and then include the sprayer. Thank you so much for your feedback.
And I think we can talk to the rec board as well to see what options we might have there, because there are some beautification funds that just weren't even allocated this year.
Right.
Very good. Moving forward, I think I've pretty much addressed your water capital already. You're seeing that meter project, and then you're seeing a couple other improvements to your water fund. We had to really peel back our needs this year to match our available funds. What you've done with rates is going to help us make the water fund more healthy, but it's going to take years. And Brian's team has done a wonderful job. I think filtering or maybe cutting off limbs in request to at least live within our means, and I appreciate that. The same is the case with the wastewater fund. We're a little bit more healthy there. It does include different than what was proposed, that meter project cut in half, and then some other improvements to your lift stations and improvements to the treatment plant. Sanitation fund, the biggest is that landfill remediation, $650,000. We do have grants coming in to offset that if we jump onto that program as described by Imberg Miller. We have a hook truck replacement. That's basically the truck that hauls your roll-off containers that we lease out and rent to our community. And then that refuse truck from fiscal year 23 that will be received and paid for next fiscal year. I just don't think it's a good idea to pay for that truck before we get it. So let's wait till we get it. Let our guys run through it a little bit.
they have to have some incentive to deliver the truck. You know, it's like,
You know, there's something about that.
yeah.
So getting to our last capital slide, that rehabilitation project, you've already awarded this. We've got several grants to support it, but $7.1 million to improve the taxiways. The master plan, you've recently taken action on that, and we're working on it. The rotary plow and carrier, we're underway on that. You just awarded it. So we're moving on a lot of these that will be expended next fiscal year. Your Honor and Counsel, that's my presentation, and I know I did it in 50 minutes. I was hoping to do it quicker, but I hope it was thorough, and I hope on a high level, those at home, those in the audience, have an understanding of what we're proposing for the community next fiscal year. And at that, Your Honor, I just want to say again, thank you to our staff. I want to say thank you to you, and we look forward to fiscal year 24.
Okay. Again, I think we need to look at our employee compensation a little bit. Obviously, everybody in the economy is taking a big hit with the cost of living raises. And, you know, I think we all wish we could do a lot more than what we're able to do, and we've got to stay, you know, within our range. And I know, like, the health insurance going up 11.5%, everybody that has health insurance, my company included, is taking that hit. And I guess I want to make sure the employees understand that, you know, the 11.5% of the city share is a lot bigger than the 11.5% of the employee share, but it still hurts everybody involved. So, I mean, we all have to, again, buckle up, and it's one of those, you can't afford not to have a health insurance, and you can't afford to have it almost either way. So, but I would suggest maybe we look at going 5% cost of living increase, which at least is closer to the 7 point whatever it was.
I agree
I
with
think-
that, yeah.
That number would be about another $66,000 roughly, and I think that'd be a good idea for us to do. To, you know, if you look at that chart, we're at least a point behind. That would get us sort of caught up, if you want to call it that. I mean, there's some years there that we had a 6% increase and the cost of living was only 1.5%, so, you know, there's some catch up there, but, you know, this last couple of years has been tough on everybody, and I think it's a challenge to keep good employees, and we want to make sure we're keeping our good employees, and I think that's the least we could do to try to do that. I don't know what everybody else thinks. But.
I agree.
I agree. Your Honor.
Mike, if
Go ahead, Tim.
I'm sorry, I can't hear myself, and it's really loud. I agree completely. I think one of the most important, and I really liked Kyle's quote, which is budgeting is prioritizing. It's showing your priorities. It's showing what's important to your organization. And I really what's the most important to our organization is our people. I mean, and I think if we sit there and do an increase, but show, hey, we've got the numbers that support 1% more, but we're going to purposely be below that. I think we ought to try to do better at meeting that. So I support that 100%. If we've got the funds for it, if we can still, of course, be fiscally responsible.
And Mr. Chairman, to answer the
Kyle.
mayor's question, we can do it. Ms. Harris, Ms. Watson have already looked at this option. We do feel it's the right thing to do, and if it's the consensus of the council, we would love to offer a higher cost of living to our employees.
Your Honor.
Yes, Kristen.
I was just thinking last year in our conversations, we were really trying to do more and we didn't have the money. So I think it's really appropriate now to show our appreciation and support because we do have the money.
Your Honor, the question I had too, and Kyle was able to answer it, was to make sure that what we do is sustainable. You know, we had some additional funds this year that are over and above what we've had in the past. So Kyle indicated that that is a sustainable increase.
Your Honor, and to Mr. Peranto's point, Councilman Peranto's point, yes, we can make that work.
Kyle.
Well, the most important product that we have here at the city, other than providing clean water, good sewer, garbage pickup, is good employees. And the only way you can have a good employee is if he is satisfied with some of an income that he can sustain his family. And if every pasture is greener than ours, we're not going to have that, we're not going to fit our goals. And we need to take care of those individuals that we're responsible for.
Thank you.
Your Honor, if that's the consensus, we'd be happy to make those adjustments, along with the other adjustments we've talked about tonight. From a process standpoint, we are required by statute to adopt the budget by public hearing, not earlier than the second Tuesday of June and not later than the third Tuesday of June. You got a window there.
Full meeting.
So we're scheduled for June 13th to have a public hearing and an adoption of this budget. Thank you for your participation up to this point. Thank you for giving us the priorities that you've outlined. We'll take the feedback tonight, amend the budget book, and then we'll present that to you for adoption on the 13th.
So we have a meeting on the 6th, our regular meeting.
Your Honor, that is correct. We have a regular
And
meeting.
we'll have a budget meeting on the 13th and then a regular meeting on the
20th.
20, whatever that is. Yeah, 20th. So, correct?
That's correct.
So in place of a work session, we'll have our budget meeting.
Correct. It'll be a special meeting.
Okay. All right. And anybody have anything else to be brought forward for the meeting?
I was just going to say, Your Honor, that I appreciate the process and the communication that we've had, the city staff's work on this. Budgets are huge, and they're arduous and kind of painful sometimes. And, you know, I think this year, we've had some additional funds that kind of helped offset some of the pinch points that we've had in the past, but really a great budget and a lot of work put into it, so I appreciate it.
Okay.
Mike,
Yes, Kyle?
on solid waste, which they don't have they have a third of the employees that we have here in Riverton. They are budgeting roughly 7% cost of living, and the same reason, because the previous years have been very, very tight. And we just need to keep good people. And you keep good people by paying them what they're worth. And it's more expensive, let me tell you, to hire new and train than keep a good employee.
Yep. Okay. If there's nothing else to be brought forward, we'll call the meeting adjourned at 7:56.